program that everybody is talking about across college football nation in terms of closing the deal, wrapped up its deal in terms of spring football on Saturday in Athens. We got Palmer Thoms on the line from Dogs 247 Sports to help us break down Georgia football. Of course, like the video, share the videos on social media. If you enjoy the content, others will as well. Please share the videos and subscribe right here. Palmer, how are we doing today?
Doing well. Felt great to be back within the confines of Sanford Stadium. On a personal note, it was my first time in there since the covering a game since the 2019 season. Because, you know, with Georgia only having 3 home games last season, press box, COVID protocol, you know, wasn't able to get in there and cover any Georgia home games last year. So felt great to be back at Sanford Stadium watching the Bulldogs play between the hedges, and certainly excited to break it down with you here today.
Palmer, was there about 20,000 in the stands?
Yeah, it was pretty packed in terms of what they were allowed to have. I know tickets were of very high demand, and so you know those were tough to come by in Athens on the streets on Saturday. You know, they actually ended up charging for tickets this year. I think it was $10 a ticket, and they ended up donating that to a local charity. Georgia's got a Dogs for Pups initiative that they started this past season, and they're really helping local schools here, you know, stay afloat in terms of COVID-19. And so that was great to see, you know, the fans back in Sanford Stadium and the impact that was able to have in the Athens community.
All right, Palmer, let's get to it. And we'll start at quarterback, and it's almost a 2 or 3 step process and evaluation here. We got JT Daniels, proven commodity, but is he going to be elite? Then we've got the category of backups and a very talented room. You've got Stetson Bennett, who has the most experience. Then you've got a couple highly sought after recruits who are starting to get into the system. So sort it out from JT on down.
Yeah, last time I was on with you, we did talk about this where, you know, we said, hey, JT Daniels, very clear-cut starter, and he showed that on Saturday. Went 28 of 41 for 324 yards, 3 touchdowns, didn't throw an interception. He really settled in as the game, you know, went along. You know, early on you could see, you know, maybe he was knocking off a little rust in terms of, you know, just playing in front of fans and on the big stage. And really, you know, as the game went along, settled in, you know, progressed from hitting his checkdowns to making some plays downfield. You know, he was working with a limited group of wide receivers that I know we'll talk about. Had 6 scholarship guys that were not active on Saturday, and so you know, it was really good to see him. You know, he looked very comfortable. You know, in terms of. And I guess that's easy to say for a spring game because you know you're not going to get hit. You're wearing that white jersey and not getting touched by the defensive linemen. You know, it's easy to be comfortable in the pocket, step up into some things that you may not be able to actually step up to once the bullets are actually flying. But you know, in terms of what JT Daniels was asked to do on Saturday, he did it really well. You know, like I said, he looked good. And, you know, I think Georgia is very confident in what they have in terms of QB1. You know, down on the line, Stetson Bennett would be the second quarterback if called upon. You know, like we said, if Daniel's helmet came off mid-game, you know, Stetson has to step in. It would be Bennett that steps in. He didn't get a ton of reps this spring, didn't get a ton of reps in the game. I think he only ran 2 or 3 drives, one of which ended on the first play of the drive with a quick interception. But, you know, he went 3 of 4. That was the interception was his only incompletion for 58 yards, was helped big time by a couple of big receptions. Adonai Mitchell had a nice one with him, Demetrius Robertson. And Bennett actually led the first touchdown drive for Georgia, marching them down the field and getting his red squad on the board first with as Zamir White punched it in from 2 yards out. You know, I think Stetson, he looked comfortable. You could tell that he's spent the most time around this Georgia program. You know, it looks very comfortable in this Georgia offense. And, you know, again, if Georgia has to, you know, turn to a backup in a you know, scenario where it's quick change, Stetson is going to be the guy. Then on the black team, it was Carson Beck and Brock Vandegrift, and those are your two longer-term backup options. The development of these quarterbacks is going to be huge because those are the guys that are going to be competing for the job once Daniels is gone. Carson Beck took most of the reps with the twos this spring. He went 22 of 31 for 236 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. His 1 interception was not great. It was really overthrown over Arian Smith, and you could see that he was struggling, maybe putting the ball right on the money. Overthrew Smith 2 or 3 times on Saturday. Missed another target in the end zone. I like Daniels. He settled in as the game went along, but to me, Brock Vandegrift stood out more than Carson Beck, just in terms of what Vandegrift was able to do with his legs. Looked very comfortable moving around the pocket. I think his first play, they rolled him out to the right and he completed a pass downfield. He ended up going to 6 of 9 for 47 yards and had a couple of rushes as well. Only showed up with 3 yards on the stat sheet, thanks to some sacks, but did have a long of 13. So I think Georgia feels very confident in terms of what they've got in this quarterback room. Kirby was asked after the game if this is the best he's felt about a quarterback room. And, he said that, top to bottom, he feels really good about all 4 of those guys in Daniels, Bennett, Beck, and Vandegrift. He wouldn't really compare it to some of the other rooms that he's had, but he did know that he felt really good about these 4 quarterbacks. Thinks that they're all bright, intelligent guys and they continue to challenge each of them in their development. So, I think in terms of quarterback, Georgia can feel very confident in where it's at headed into this 2021 season.
Get your free mask, Georgia or 35 other teams at voiceofcollegefootball.com, voiceofcollegefootball.com. You get a free mask. We get you a coupon code as soon as you register for free, 20% off your first purchase, and you're in the running for a $25 gift card as well, voiceofcollegefootball.com. Palmer, we talked about it last week, and I think it's pretty safe to say in evaluating a spring game, the trenches are difficult, especially with the run game being somewhat compromised. Those matchups on the outside, they're almost like a real game. They're almost like full football because it's almost exactly like that type of matchup between the wide receivers and the defensive backs. Now, as you set up for us before the spring game, with the big weapons out for Georgia, with the secondary being probably the most questionable unit on the team based on defections to the NFL and based on injuries, that they might be in for a tough ride if they had to face the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 guys, but those guys were out of the lineup.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. Georgia was down 6 scholarship receivers. George Pickens with an ACL injury, he'll probably miss the season. But in the other 5 guys are likely to be back for the fall. They had Dominic Blaylock that is continuing to recover from an ACL injury. He actually was dressed out and went through the 7-on-7 drills that they were doing earlier, before this actual scrimmage. So probably if it was an actual game, he probably would have been good to go. But they're going to play it safe with him. They had Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint, who's coming back from an ankle injury that ended his 2020 season. He was in a no-contact jersey, but went through those 7-on-7 drills. Jermaine Burton, had a slight knee injury this spring. Again, no-contact jersey, went through the 7-on-7 drills. Arian Smith actually was in a no-contact jersey, but played in the game. But obviously didn't get the full experience, and he was actually running with the number 2 offense. Just because of, the limitations with him and his injuries. They were missing Justin Robinson, Jackson Meeks. Definitely a banged up receiver room. But in terms of what they did have, Adonai Mitchell was very impressive. He's an early enrollee out of Missouri City, Texas. Actually didn't play his senior year of high school football. And as he was getting ready to come to Georgia, early enrolled, was actually here for bowl practices as Georgia was preparing for the Peach Bowl. But Kirby Smart told us after the game that he got sick and so was on campus but didn't get to practice. Was here for probably a little over a week but didn't actually get to practice. So that was unfortunate for him. But he absolutely made the most of his opportunities this spring. Stepped up in a big time role, led the team in targets with 13 targets, brought in 7 of those for 105 yards. Both of those were team highs in the game, and had a nice touchdown connection with JT Daniels to end the first half. Those two were certainly on the same page, and I think that's really encouraging for Georgia fans because, Daniels clearly was very comfortable with George Pickens. You saw that in those last 4 games of the season. Pickens had his 2 biggest games of the season against Missouri and Cincinnati, and Daniels, was right there with him. Those two were on the same page all, down that final stretch. Without Pickens, excuse me. There's a lot of questions about who's going to be replacing that, who's going to be the guy that JT Daniels is most comfortable with. And Adonai Mitchell looked, incredibly comfortable with him. He was running a lot of the same routes that Pickens was running, playing that X position. He was in, with some one-on-one matchups. JT said that Adonai is a really twitchy guy, that they feel great about him. When you can get him in a one-on-one matchup, similar to George Pickens, you feel confident, and the ball is going to go that way a lot of the time. You saw Mitchell getting thrown the back shoulder ball that Georgia loves to throw. And he, again, like a lot of these players, he got more and more comfortable as the game went along and made some plays the more that he and JT Daniels got connected. Kirby Smart said after the game that Mitchell's a guy, he was a 3-star recruit out of high school. Not the most highly regarded guy in terms of recruiting rankings. I believe he was the number 64 wide receiver per the 247 Sports composite. Was in the 300s in terms of overall players, 3-star recruit. And this is a guy that Kirby said, look, we trust our evaluations. We think that we evaluate players as good, if not better, than anyone in the country. And this was a guy that, regardless of what everyone else said, we wanted him. He was a take for us. And so, they pushed hard for him. He was committed to Ole Miss and ended up silently decommitting from the Rebels, Lane Kiffin and the Rebels, in May before he committed to Georgia in July. Didn't play his senior season of football, and came in, really made the most of his opportunities, and had really strong spring practice. Smart said that the last 3 practices for Mitchell were the 3 best for him, and as Georgia had these receivers get banged up, more and more opportunities opened up, and he certainly took advantage of those.
Got Palmer Thomas on the line from Dogs 247 Sports, breaking down Georgia's spring game. Head on over to 247 Sports, Dogs 247, and check out Palmer and the rest of the staff there. All right, when you shop Amazon, use that link in the description section below. Help us build the channel. Same shopping experience for you. In the trenches, depending on how you play, meaning the coach's approach, I haven't had a chance to check out Georgia's spring game yet. Have a number of other teams, including Alabama, over the weekend, and they played a pretty respectable type tackling game, went at it pretty well. You can tell more along the offensive and defensive front. Obviously, with the quarterback out of play, it's a tap football game for him. The sacks are a bit overrated at that standpoint, but it sounds like the defensive front took charge.
Yeah, it was really impressive to watch Georgia's first defensive line versus Georgia's first offensive line. The offensive line is maybe a question coming into this season, in terms of not necessarily the talent that they have. They're going to be incredibly talented, but, where that talent is going to end up playing and which combination that they're going to end up rolling with. Jamari Salyer is a guy who is definitely going to be in the rotation, definitely going to be in the starting 5, in my opinion. But, he didn't play a ton this spring. He's been battling some minor injuries. So he was in and out of the rotation on Saturday. You ended up seeing Xavier Truss, Justin Schaefer, Warren Erickson, Tate Ratledge, and Warren McClendon from left to right on that first offensive line. And then they did some shuffling around with when Salyer came in. He played some left tackle, played some left guard. You know, the offensive line, especially the interior offensive line, looked like it was struggling. But you know, I think that is a combination of the inexperience of those guys playing together. They're going to continue to get better and better and better as they get more reps together. You know, maybe the shuffling around hasn't been helping them develop that chemistry this spring, but also, you know, you look at Georgia's interior defensive line, and it's one of the best in the country in Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt. You know, you've got Jalen Carter that's in the mix there, Trayvon Walker coming off the edge, you know, Adam Anderson, Nolan Smith. That Georgia front seven, and you know, you want to add in the inside linebackers, Quay Walker and Channing Tindall both had impressive days on Saturday. Walker led the team in tackles with 8 stops, 1 tackle for loss. You know, Devontae Wyatt had 2 sacks. You know, he looked very impressive to me. You know, looks like a guy that is going to be a force to be reckoned with this fall. Jordan Davis didn't have the best of days, but you know, a lot of times Davis doesn't show up on the stat sheet all that much because, you know, he's a big guy that's requiring two blockers, and he's opening things up for the linebackers, you know, opening things up for Devontae Wyatt, Trayvon Walker, Jalen Carter. Those guys all did have bigger days, whereas Davis only had 1 tackle. And so, you know, I think there's no question about Jordan Davis where he's going to fit into this defensive line. And like I said, Walker, Carter, Wyatt, all 3 of those guys are going to be forces to be reckoned with. I think in terms of the offensive line, you've got to see some improvement between now and the opening game. I would say Georgia's defensive line is probably the first or second best defensive line in the country, and definitely the toughest, you know, first or second toughest matchup that this offensive line is going to get. But the other one of those is going to be Clemson in the opening week. And so, you know, you've got to, you know, develop as fall camp goes along. You know, you've got to see these guys get better, develop more chemistry. And certainly I would imagine that as Georgia approaches that first game, they're going to do less shuffling around on the offensive line and more development of chemistry with the starting 5.
Palmer, when you take this spring game, but not just the spring game, the entire spring session and everything that came out in regards to what Kirby Smart, the other coaches, the players had to say, what you were able to gather in your own coverage and looking at other people's work and the video that came out. And would there be a player or 2 or 3, wherever you want to take that did themselves a lot of good this spring, or other storylines or themes that jumped out that either became a highlight or a concern or something else that you feel different about this football team today than you did a month ago?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, I think definitely the developments of the wide receiver room is something that Georgia fans maybe feel a little bit differently about, maybe a little more hesitation, you know, going into the season without George Pickens than you know, when they were entering spring with him. You know, but I think in terms of a player that really took advantage of that opportunity, I mentioned Adonai Mitchell. You know, I'm coming out of spring incredibly high on him. You know, just in terms of replacing Pickens and, you know, as an early enrollee, making a name for himself early on. You know, he's a guy that I think really helped himself. But I'm going to go a different direction here and talk about the defensive backs, because I think that's a story that, you know, there was a lot of questions coming into spring about how those defensive backs would look. And I think there's still some questions to be answered there. You know, maybe that's something that, you know, I think that's an area that Georgia could target in the transfer portal. You know, if they've got Tyke Smith coming in from West Virginia, he'll probably end up playing the star position. He's more of a safety type than, you know, an outside defensive back, you know, playing at corner. But, you know, in terms of the guys that they have here, you know, I think Jalen Kimber, you know, really made some progress this spring. Keely Ringo continues to develop. Amir Speed is a guy that, you know, I think a lot of Georgia fans, you know, knew the name because he's been around the program for a long time, but I don't think anybody really expected him to be, you know, the guy. I think Keely Ringo is probably the guy that people turned to and said, hey, you know, pencil him in as a starter this fall. Well, not so fast. Ringo, is continuing to develop, but you've got Kimber and Speed there that are giving him, a run for his money in terms of a starting spot at corner. I think those two guys, those three guys, are likely to be rotating at corner this fall, unless Georgia goes out and gets someone out of the transfer portal there, which I think is certainly likely. And I think along the lines of the transfer portal, you could see Georgia targeting a wide receiver there as well. If they've got two spots left in terms of initial counters and transfer spots, obviously things change when guys transfer out of the program. But I think, in terms of scholarships opening up, but I think, those are two positions that Georgia is likely to target in the portal based on the developments of this spring.
Now, Palmer, as you well know, in covering this team in college football for a while, we've got to this point of the calendar where you don't want to hear any news. You don't want to hear anything until August, because if you hear something, that means somebody got hurt or somebody got in trouble. But in this particular year,
somebody's leaving the program.
Somebody's leaving the program. But in this particular year, I think we're going to have a little bit more action, as you well know, because of the delayed open period with the dead period, and a lot of more players most likely committing after we get into June and they're able to take those official visits. And also with, as you just mentioned, the transfer portal humming along and those opportunities. Now that guys know a little bit better where they size up on the roster and on the depth chart, and they may make a decision to move on to somewhere else. So that being said, I would normally say we'll see in a couple months. We'll break down positions, get set for SEC Media Days, but I don't know. We may run into each other here and there based on what kind of commitments and transfer portal moves are made.
Yeah, I think, it's an exciting time for college football because, with, like you said, with everything opening back up in June in terms of recruiting, with the developments of the transfer portal and this one-time transfer policy, it's definitely there is no off season. There's no time that you can, turn a blind eye to, to college football. I think it really is. It has been for a while, but now more so than ever, it is a year-round endeavor for these players, for these coaches, and certainly for the media covering college football.
Absolutely. Check out all our videos with Palmer. We've broken down the positions. We've looked at all the recruiting and so forth as we've headed now toward August. Palmer, as always, we appreciate you stopping by. Know you've got a ton on your plate and appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mark.